Hello YouTube, it's me Bergie and I'm here with my November wrap-up. Now right now I'm filming it on the 6th of December, so hopefully, or no, it's the 7th. Anyway, the first full week of December, so hopefully it'll get up and posted relatively soon. But that aside, let's get into my general statistics. So in November I read 6 books, which I know for me is like quite low, but 4 days I did not read at all because I was spending time with family for Thanksgiving, so I should have expected I wouldn't read those days. And also I was kind of in a slump, which there's nothing wrong with a slump. So for the most part I was just making sure I was reading, even if it was like only 20 pages a night or something like that. So I didn't really read that much. But anyway, I read 6 physical books, 0 ebooks, no surprise there. I read all library books and no owned books, which I'm really disappointed in because, again, I have so many books that I have not read that I own that I should get to, but the library just pressures me into reading them, those library books. So yeah, this month I'm hoping to do a lot better and read more evenly books that I own myself or books that I borrowed from the library. Because I still recommend using the library. It's such a great place, and I know I'm not going to stop using the library, as I shouldn't. And as for the gender of the authors, I read 3 male written books and 3 female written books, so I was dead even, and I'm happy about that. For genres, I read 4 fantasy novels, 1 sci-fi, and 1 classic. For reading level, I read 1 adult, 1 new adult, 3 YA, and 1 children/middle grade. For publishing dates, I read 0 pre-1800s, 1 1800s book, so I'm ecstatic about that, 0 1900s, 0 2000s, and 5 2010s. Not proud about that. And with all of these different categories, I found that I did not read very diversely at all this month, which is another problem that I need to work on for December. Now, as for rating, I gave 1 book 5 stars, I gave 2 4 stars, 2 3 stars, 1 2 star, and 0 1 star. So pretty around the board. There was 1 book that I really enjoyed, a couple that I thought were okay, and then 1 that I kind of did not like at all. Now, for total of pages read in November, I read 2,621, which if you do the math is about 87 pages a day. Again, I was in a slump, and there were 4 days I spent not reading at all, so that's why the number is quite low compared to some of my other months. But again, that's okay. It's okay to have a downtime in reading. Now, that being said, let's get into the actual books I read. So the first book I read was A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J. Maas. This is the 3rd book in her A Court of Thorns and Roses series, and like I told you in last month's wrap-up, I quickly gobbled up these last 2 books. It took me a little bit longer to read the second one because I didn't enjoy it as much, but I still read it quite quickly. So if you don't know what this series is about, it's basically a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but the 2nd and 3rd books are much more than that. It kind of deviates from that general plot of the 1st book, but I don't want to go into it because it would spoil the series for you. And like I said, it wasn't as enjoyable as The Court of Mist and Fury, which I have to say is my favorite out of the series so far. So yeah, it kind of went downhill. It was a little bit slower and also a little too fast-paced, if you get what I mean. There were different scenes where I expected it to be a little bit longer and get more insight on what was happening or description or explanation, and it was just over in a snap, and I just thought that was really disappointing. Pretty okay. I did give this a C, which, like I said, is a little bit less than what I gave. I'm not super excited for the following books to come, but I'm still going to pick them up because I did enjoy the series Akoma. So the second book I read was The Book of Dust, Volume 1, La Belle Sauvage by Philip Pullman. This is in the same world as his Dark Material series, which I read earlier this year and loved. And this specific book is going to be part of, I think, a trilogy. But this book was a prequel, and I think the other 2 books are either going to be sequels to his Dark Materials or like far in the future from when that series kind of took place. So it's kind of all around the board and giving more background for his Dark Materials. Like with his Dark Materials, I don't want to set in stone my rating because I feel like this is a book where you kind of have to read all of the books in order to get a clear picture of whether you enjoyed it or not. That being said though, I did love the writing style. I enjoyed having more background to his dark materials, and so I did enjoy it, so I will say that. But there were points, especially towards the end chapters of this book, where fantasy was kind of thrown in, because if you don't know the series, for the most part it seems like it could happen in real life. There are some aspects that make it a little bit more fantastical, but for the most part it's more realistic. But again, in the last couple of chapters of this book, fantasy was kind of like really thrown at you, and it kind of felt out of place. I don't want to say that exactly, because again, it is a fantastical world, but it just did not flow as well, I don't think. It was just kind of thrown in there, which is not as good of a description as I want to give, but yeah. I still did enjoy this book. I gave it a B, but again, I need to read the entire series to form my thoughts about them. The third book I read was Cinder by Marissa Meyer. This was in my summer TBR, prospective TBR video, but I didn't get to it, but I finally did now. And it was on that TBR because I've heard so much about it on BookTube that I wanted to see if it was worth the hype. Again, not worth the hype. It was very predictable. It was very simply written. It was not attention holding, and I did not like the characterization of the characters. Oh, I guess I should explain. This is kind of a reimagining of Cinderella in a destroyed world. Not a dystopian world, just throwing that out there, because I think on Goodreads it's kind of classified as a dystopian. It's not. And that concept does sound interesting, but I do not think it was executed well at all, and for that reason I gave it a D. The next book I read was Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. This is a book where the world sucks so much that most people live in a virtual reality game whose creator died a couple years before the story takes place, and in his death, he left a will where he says whoever finds all of the Easter eggs in his virtual reality game gets to win his fortune, meaning the rights to the game and all of that kind of stuff. So that's really the main premise. We're following one character try to be the first to get all of the Easter eggs. Again, this is not a dystopian. It has the potential to be a dystopia because it does contain some of the elements of a dystopian, but it does not focus on the social political aspects that would make it a dystopian. It's just kind of mentioned every now and then, but it's not a dystopian. Now, in the beginning it was a bit slow, but that's kind of understandable because it had to build the world and explain different aspects of the virtual reality game and the world. I love the 80s pop references, or pop culture references, especially after having finished watching Stranger Things 2. I was just wanting more 80s pop culture references, and this definitely delivered. And overall, it is a great adventure slash suspense novel, and I do really recommend you read it. I gave it an A-. It quickly became one of my favorite books, I think. I mean, there were some issues with it, but for the most part, I did enjoy it. The fifth book I read this month was The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This I've heard from one booktuber in particular. I think her channel is a Clockwork Reader, I think. I might be wrong, but yeah, I've heard her raving about it, and I wanted to see how I felt about it. So this is basically about two children who are raised to battle in a game that takes place at a circus over a couple of years, and that does sound interesting and enjoyable, especially because it does have to do with magic and that kind of stuff. And I do enjoy magical fantasy novels. However, even though I did find the writing to be very beautiful, it was kind of disjointed because it goes back and forth in different time periods. So you'll be going back to the past or you'll go right to now. It just, I thought it did not connect or flow as nicely as I would have wanted it to. And because of that, you don't really get strong ties with the characters because you're seeing their lives out of order. Now, I think this was done to present a magical, dreamlike world, which does go with the circus, which is called, again, The Night Circus, obviously. But I think the author overdoes the dreamlikeness or the magicalness of the story so much so that it kind of ruins it for me, and it misses the mark of the dreamlike quality because it was overdone, or she tried too hard to do that. And overall, I think this is one of the rare cases where I think the movie would be better than a book. I think this is more fitting towards like the big screen or the TV screen. Overall, I did give this a C+. I thought the story was cool. I just did not think it was executed very well. And now the final book I read was Dracula by Bram Stoker. Everybody knows Dracula, but no one really knows the story, and that's pretty much how I went into it. Basically, this is a vampire story where Dracula, who is an Eastern European, wants to move to London, and during this time he raises suspicion about his actions and because of how he comes into contact with other people. And it's written as a collection of journal entries, of letters, of newspaper clippings, and that kind of stuff. And like I said, I didn't really know what I would expect going into this book because I only really know the figure of Dracula rather than the story. It is very similar to Frankenstein. I mean, both are gothic horror novels written around the same time, and also the formatting, letters, and that kind of stuff. However, I enjoyed Frankenstein more. I think it achieved the horror and just the intrigue a lot better than Dracula did. I personally like the provoking thoughts that you get from Frankenstein a lot more than with Dracula, which Dracula is more of a comment on the changing role of women, seen as negative, during the turn of the 19th century. So, I mean, it was interesting to see how someone during that time saw the role of women changing as being adverse, but I didn't like it as much as I liked Frankenstein. And sadly, I will compare it to that because they are both of the same genre and were written around the same time, and both dealing with monsters and humanity's role as being kind of monstrous, but personifying it into an actual monster. Overall, I did give this a B-, so I did enjoy it, and I do recommend more people read it because it is interesting and fascinating to see the actual story of Dracula and the kind of start of the vampire hysteria that we now have gone through these past couple of years. I mean, it's not the first vampire story out there, but it's most definitely the most popular. Although, which is something fascinating, it wasn't really popular during the time it was written. It only became popular years after when people started making movies about the Dracula character. And that's again why we know Dracula so well, but we don't really know his story. But yeah, those are the 6 books I read in November. If you have read any of these books, please let me know. I would love to talk to you about them. If you have any reads that you suggest that I pick up, please let me know too. I would always welcome more suggestions. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that's everything, so I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.